Most of the sides we've come up against, even including the English sides, have maybe two very good opening bowlers. But the other bowlers that come on really haven't done their job. And I would say that I have 6 good bowlers in the side who have all done their job, and they call them the mean machine up here. They'd rather give away money than give away runs, and for a Scotsman to say that's something.
I mean, really, it's just another game of cricket. Different set of surroundings and the place is different, that's all, isn't it? It's only another game of cricket.
Well, it's not really another game of cricket, is it? Come off it. I mean, you're at Lord's.
So we're at Lord's. We should go there to try and win the game. But it's still only another game of cricket to be won, that's all.
What's your normal preparation like on a Saturday night in Fluky? If you were playing on a Sunday, what would you be doing?
Get him in there, it really changed much, fella. I know the rest of that. Take it as it comes.
Would you say Fluky has a special style?
They've a special style in that they're a Scottish team that's going to beat an English team tomorrow and win the trophy.
We all enjoy a David against Goliath sporting story, a backs-to-the-wall victory which embodies everything that we love about sport and captures the spirit of human endeavour and competition. But Fluky Cricket Club's victory at Lord's in the 1985 Village Cup final was so unlikely, so against the odds, and so beautifully Scottish, it makes Braveheart look like a B-movie. This is Fluky Fever, when the Scots beat the English at the home of cricket on BBC Radio Scotland. I'm Andrew Cotter, and welcome to the extraordinary story of when the cricket gods smiled on the Fife village of Fluky. There's nothing Scottish sports fans love more than commitment, passion, and England losing at anything, especially when it's a Scottish team dishing out the defeat to the old enemy. And happily, the inspirational story of Fluky Cricket Club winning the National Village Cup ticks all those boxes. The sport of cricket holds a curious place in Scotland's hearts. Often seen as the preserve of English privilege, it's widely regarded as a minority sport north of the border. But nothing could be further from the truth. Journalist and author Neil Drysdale has written a book about Fluky's venture into folklore called Dad's Army, and attended the match on that fateful September day in 1985. And he very much believes that cricket is Scotland's secret game.
Yeah, cricket's been played in Scotland since 1785, 1790. The foundation of the Scottish Cricket Union was way back then, and there were clubs springing up. You had Kelso in 1820, you had Grange in 1832, you had Rossie Priory in 1828. You had all kinds of clubs, all over the country. You had Clydesdale, you had Aberdeenshire, you had Brechin, all these different clubs in different parts of Scotland in the 1840s and 1850s, and these clubs, were thriving long before the SFA or the SRU was set up. And in actual fact, Clydesdale, their ground, they kind of sold their ground on to a little kind of football team, in the 1840s and 1850s, and that team later went on to become Glasgow Rangers. So it was Clydesdale were there first before Rangers, rather than the other way around. So it's just one of these things that there's been clubs sprung up all over the country. The Aberdeenshire Grades, you had the Western Union in the west of the country, you had the East League, and every little factory, every little works team, there was all kinds of clubs, and I think it's a very, very inclusive sport as well. There were, right from the word go, there was working class guys. There was Fauldhouse. It's one of the most working class places you can ever imagine in Scotland. Their cricket club was up and running in 1835, which there's no rugby club there. There's no rugby club in Armadale. I played cricket in both these places, and it's just one of these sports that just took a hold. But in these days, cricket was just part of the bedrock. Every little community had its cricket club. Kids would be playing cricket during the summer with their little plastic bats or their tennis balls or whatever way they did it. Even if there wasn't a formal club, they would be out there hitting a ball.
So let's talk about Fluky. Situated at the foot of the Lomond Hills in the Kingdom of Fife, the village boasts a population of 1,200. And, as fate would have it, is located exactly 500 miles from Lord's Cricket Ground. So to get there, they would need to walk 500 miles, and to return, walk 500 more. And yes, you might feel a song coming on. Although, for the record, they took the bus. Dave Christie was the captain of Fluky Cricket Club in 1985, and one of the 11 heroes who walked 500 more to the hallowed Lord's Turf on that historic September day. Here, Dave gives an insight into the culture of cricket in Fruchi, and we started by asking him how important the game and the club were to the community when he first started playing.
A huge amount. In my younger day, it was the place, although it was just a wooden pavilion. And the hearse house was at the back of it, which we used to play round about there. But you turned up on a Monday night for practice as a kid, and you didn't get a shot of batting until you'd rolled the wicket with a hand roller. You hit the field all night, and the senior players had their bat and their ball and they went away home, and the kids were all left to roll up the mats and the nets and put them all away. But we did that because we desperately wanted to be a cricketer and play for the cricket club. So that's how I started. I started off at 12-year-old being a scorer for the second 11. And I soon learned that every Saturday take my plimsolls and my long trousers to the match with me and hope that somebody wouldn't turn up and I would get a game. I still had to do the scoring while we were batting. Of course, I was number 11, but that's how I started, and I think that's how a lot of kids in the village started. And we were encouraged, my mother and father encouraged us to be cricketers because I had an older brother who was a better cricketer than me, and I had a younger brother, and we've all captained Fruchi Cricket Club, the three of us. So it just shows you how a family can get involved. And that wasn't just us, that was a lot of the families in the village got involved in the cricket club through their parents or grandparents.
Fruchi's just one of these places where, there were 2 or 3 head teachers and people with a real love for the game who just all came along pretty much at the same time in the 1920s, 1930s, in the 1940s and 50s. Bob Tully, Bob Keith, then you had the Christie family. You had various families who just all loved the game, but it wasn't just that. The public park was very close to the school, and kids just grew up, and the club was incredibly inclusive. They wanted anybody who wanted to pick up a bat or wanted to pick up a cricket ball, they wanted to help them. And that meant that generations, fathers passed it down to their sons, to their daughters, to whoever wanted to play. There were men's games, there were women's games. There was just this feeling that, cricket, why not? Dave Christie's always said that. He's never understood the kind of why. He used to meet so many people that would say, why do you bother with cricket in Scotland? And he would say, well, if you play cricket in Somerset, you play cricket in Wales, or you play cricket, anywhere in Lancashire, or in Durham. I mean, Durham's just a few miles over the border. And if it's popular there, why wouldn't it be popular in Fruchi? But I mean, people like, Bob Tully and Bob Keith, these guys, these were tough nuts. They were people that they would put a sixpence on the wicket and try and get the young kids, if they managed to put the ball on the sixpence, they would get the sixpence. So a lot of kids were spending ages trying to do this, and it was like practice makes perfect with that, so they just grew up. And obviously when I was doing the book, one of the things that came through was all the family connections, the Crichtons, the Cowans, the Christies, how they were passing on the torch, and there was 3 generations, one family playing for the club, 3 generations were members, and their wives were involved, their partners were involved.
The 1980s, the era of mullets and leg warmers, rolled up jacket sleeves and big shoulder pads, when the latest must-have item was a mobile phone that was the size of a house brick, twice as heavy, and with only slightly more technology. Frankie might have been telling us to relax, but the Scottish cricketing landscape was changing rapidly, and Fruchi was leading the charge. They were putting Fife cricket firmly on the map by regularly beating not just local rivals, but more established clubs, such as Heriot's Cricket Club from Edinburgh. Here's Dave Christie again, talking about Fruchi's emergence as a Scottish cricketing powerhouse.
I think we gave a lot of encouragement to other teams lower than ourselves, maybe a wee bit. Mm-hmm. Yes, if Fruchi can do it, we can do it. And 5 teams started to take on the Edinburgh clubs. I think we've changed things a bit, you know, looking back on all these days. Going back to playing against Heriots and Hamish Moore. Hamish Moore came here in a friendly, I can remember, before 1980. And he went out to bat and he was out very cheaply. And all the remark we got from him was, it's just a cabbage patch. Referring to our wicket, it's a cabbage patch. And we beat them that day. And that was the start of it. It wasn't a right full Heriots side, it was maybe a mixture of firsts and seconds, but still a good time. But that was his remarks because we were cricket square. It was a cabbage patch.
When Frookie started out, I mean, they didn't come into being until 1908. But by the time that we got to the late 70s and early 80s, you know, Frookie were they were close, obviously deadly rivals with their near neighbours Falkland, and you had all these different teams across Fife. The game, there was like 7 or 8 divisions of the East League, and you had 8 or 9 teams in them. So that's 80, 90, 100 teams, you know, taking part in these competitions. And that competition, the West of Scotland had its own multi-division sort of team. You had all kinds of, as I said, in the northeast and the south, you had the Border League, you had the Strathmore League, you had the Scottish County Championship. In 1980, Jim Love, the former England player, became the Scotland coach. They started playing against English counties in the what was at that point was the B&H Cup, because cigarette companies were still sponsoring things at that point. And Scotland, you know, Scotland's cricketers were mostly amateurs. You know, they occasionally hired a professional. I mean, people like Gordon Greenidge and Malcolm Marshall and Desmond Haynes, I mean, West Indian greats, you know, have actually all played for Scotland at one point or another. And they beat one or two of the counties. They beat Lancashire, a star-studded Lancashire team. They beat them at Northinch and Perth in 1986. So during the 80s, there was a real kind of, you know, but I mean, that sort of result, you know, Scotland beating Lancashire at that point was still, you know, wow, you know, this is, and I was still getting, when I was just starting out in journalism, wherever you went to cover these sort of stories, you were still getting most people saying, oh, I didn't know that the Jocks played cricket. And this was people in your own country, you know, but you knew from playing it, wherever you went, that there were thousands of Scots playing cricket every Saturday, every Sunday. I think at one point, it was estimated that there were more cricketers per head of population in Aberdeenshire than there were in anywhere else in Britain, except Yorkshire. And it was just a well-known statistic in the 1980s. There were more people playing cricket than there were playing rugby. And yet cricket still struggled to get much attention. And then, of course, Frookie came in the scene.
You're listening to Frookie Fever, when the Scots beat the English at the home of cricket, on BBC Radio Scotland, with me, Andrew Cotter. It's time to get a background to the National Village Cup competition and its importance in the cricketing calendar. And who better to tell us about it than the voice of cricket on BBC Radio, Jonathan Agnew.
The Cricketer National Village Cup began in 1972 after Ben Brocklehurst, long-time managing director of the Cricketer magazine, was taken by an offhand comment by Aidan Crawley, the chairman of the National Cricket Association, voicing his desire to see village cricketers play at Lord's. Ben, with his wife Belinda, formulated a plan for a national competition restricted to teams from villages of no more than 2,500 inhabitants. Publicising their venture in the Cricketer, they were met with a huge response from over 1,000 villages, 795 of which were accepted as entrants for the inaugural Village Cricket Championship, as it was known then. The National Village Cup recognises the importance of grassroots cricket and those communities involved in getting village teams onto the park each week. The competition sets out to raise awareness of the rural game and provide the opportunity for clubs from across the UK to compete against new teams and make new friends. Last year, the National Village Cup celebrated its 50th anniversary and is still going strong, with Dumbleton the current champions.
Here's Dave Christie, joined by his 1985 teammate and canny wicketkeeper Alan Duncan, to discuss how they first became aware of the National Village Cup competition.
Well, we didn't know much about it, but obviously the people that were running the club in the 70s said, oh, there's this new competition coming up, 1972. we have to join the Village Cup. So we did. We says, and the thought was, all we want to do is get to play at Lords. It'd be lovely for the club to get to the final, go and play at Lords. Whether we win or lose, it doesn't really matter, just to get there. But of course, the rest is more or less history. We joined in 72, but we soon realised, hey, we have to improve, or else we're not going anywhere near Lords. And we started, instead of training one night a week, we started training 2 nights a week, Tuesday and Thursday. And most of the guys turned up.
Did we not put a limit on the amount of drink we could have there? We had to have one less, just one drink less on a Saturday or Sunday.
No, it was a great competition, apart from getting there, to make us better players. Because we were determined to do that. And we thought we'd nothing else to do but turn up and we would win the Scottish section. No, that didn't happen. We got beat. We got beat by St Boswell's. We got beat by Meagle. We got beat by Falkland eventually. Eventually. Aye. So it made us better cricketers, there's no doubt about that. It made us think more about the game, what we were going to do, how we were going to play it. And I remember the first year we won it, the Scottish sections, 1976. And we went to play at Bishop Auckland. That was an eye-opener. You were playing against minor counties players. The boy Alan, I remember, for Bishop Auckland, when we turned up with the bus. All go with the bus, walking in. And they wanted us to pay to get in the ground. Hey, you remember that?
David, I wasn't there in the 70s, but I distinctly remember we went to West Heslington.
Aye.
And I'm fairly well known for one of the reasons I play cricket is because of the cakes. And I remember going to West Heslington and we batted first and we went in for tea at the end of the ground and we walked round filling our plate and the woman at the end says, that'll be £1, please. I says, excuse me, I'm a player. Oh no, everybody pays £1. I says, well, you can have your tea back because I'm not wanting it. And I was maybe out of order, but I thought, you don't pay for your tea. We would never do that in Fruchie. 2 plates rather than 1 plate for nothing.
When any team came to Fruchie in those days, the players, the supporters, everybody got their tea.
Of course.
Because, I remember my wife used to make 60 cakes on a Saturday for a Saturday's game. And everything was for nothing. You know, but the English, as far as teas and that were concerned, they were miserable pickers.
They did have a different setup, I must admit. But going back to the Village Cup, I was envious. You know, I heard stories in 76, 77, 78, 79 about this Village Cup. And that was another reason I wanted to come to Fruchie, because I thought, I'll have a shot. And one of the things that inspired me, and maybe this might sound really almost mercenary, but one of the things that inspired me, that I had a Man of the Match award. And I thought, I'm not as good as some of those players, but I'll try my best. And one year up at Meagle, I won the Man of the Match. I was lucky enough to get some runs. And Andy Wilkie from Mark, he gave the Man of the Match award. So I went forward to get the Man of the Match award. It was 12 eggs from his small holding. I thought, 12 bloody eggs! I've slogged my guts out here and I get 12 eggs! I never forgot that day. But I still tried hard later. But I never forget that. I thought, there was me expecting a sort of trophy or something, maybe even some money I could buy. Well, the boys would say I wouldn't buy a drink, but to buy a drink at the bar for the boys. And I walk away with 12 eggs. And I can't even bake.
Things improved, because by the time I won Man of the Match at Fruchie in 1983, I got a cricket bat.
That's right. But that was at the stage where you had to do that against Lyndall Moore. I think you did it. You got a great score. I do remember that day. They expected to beat us, Davey. They came up here, and I remember Beedale came up and had a great bowler, Grayson, and he bowled his 9 overs for about 4 or 5 runs. He was really good. But they expected to beat us. But they didn't usually beat us in the bar.
Fruchie may have won the battle in the bar, but what about the war on the wicket? In their early forays in the competition, it seemed the team from Fife had an advantage, a lucky charm, a 12th man in the shape of traditional Scottish summer weather. English opposition just didn't seem to like playing in the rain.
The English teams, they were fair weather cricketers. They didn't want to play if it was drizzly rain or it'd been a lot of rain, the ground was a bit wet, things like that. And the difference was the Fruchie boys weren't frightened to throw themselves about in the mud and the rain and the puddles, because there was plenty of puddles. And that helped us. Plus, that was the first year that every English club had to come to Scotland to play. The 4 rounds, they had to come to Scotland. And that was a great thing, to play on your own ground against them. But most of them, fair enough, most of the clubs were saying, what a nice wee ground you've got. And we did, by the time we got through to the 80s and that, we had a nice ground. We did a lot of work on the ground.
The National Village Cup competition was huge among so many different clubs. I mean, there were hundreds of clubs all across the country. From the moment the Cricketer magazine launched it, the competition in the 70s, and Ben Brocklehurst was this great old guy who really wanted club cricket to thrive. He wanted to put it in the spotlight. And of course, the incentive of getting the chance to go to Lord's, the home of cricket, the spiritual kind of home of cricket, for the final was a huge incentive to all these teams. Dave Christie, from the first minute he heard about this, he thought, I want Fruchie to be part of this. And their early forays in the competition were pretty disastrous. I mean, they had one game down in England where they got thrashed, and on the bus up they said, heaven's sake, how are we ever going to compete with these teams? But Dave Christie just drove home the message, and to be fair, a team came through that all had this real determination and drive and talent, and they came through and they just had this burning desire we want to get to Lord's.
Fruchie Cricket Club set out on their Lord's Odyssey, but first they had to overcome the talent and the culture of English village cricket. Here's Dave Christie and first Alan Duncan talking about their dreams and ambitions for the tournament and the opposition to Scottish participation that sometimes became apparent.
There was probably a feeling and there was a desire, but I imagine there was a little bit of us thought, don't get our hopes up too high, because the other side, especially the English sides, will produce. And I have to say this, it sounds like we're crying about it, but they would produce 1 or 2 ringers. I mean, I especially remember going down to Bradford, and we played a wee village outside Penal, and they had an opening batter, I'm sure his name was Goldthorpe, and some of our spectators would go down for the weekend with caravans and such like. The Kelties went down and so on and so on. And they had been at a Bradford League game the day before, and here was this chap turning out in the Bradford League, opening the baton, very good batter, and the next day he's playing for the village, a different side completely. We weren't used to that, the idea that they would switch sides and they would just play to help that team specifically get through against this side. And I remember we reduced them with Davy Cowan and Gourley. We reduced them to 33 for 8. And a ripple went round the ground saying that we had brought in a ringer, Davy Cowan, and he played for Scotland and he shouldn't be playing, and so on and so on. Davy was probably conceived in the clubhouse.
Oh, no, on the veranda. It wasn't in the clubhouse, just on the...
It couldn't be any more village than somebody had been here 90 odd years. Davy was a true villager.
Oh,
true villager. He turned down the chances to go and play cricket elsewhere because he was a fruity boy, absolute fruity boy. So I remember you in your wisdom, and it was really quite good, but it might be conceived as we were taking the mints, but you took them off and we put on 2 guys that hadn't had a bowl just to give them a wee shot. So they got up into the 50s, and the ripple went round the ground. See, they've no other bowlers. They didn't have 5 bowlers. So we were fed up with listening to this, so it was directed at us. And I think he brought them back, they took the 2 wickets and we put them out and said, that's it, we're fed up playing. And we scored the runs and come up the road. They wouldn't really drink much after again. Yeah. It was sad, very sad.
Some of the English teams were terrible. I can't mind the name of the one, but we went to play them. We hung our flags on the hedge, it was round, and they actually set fire to our flags.
But we went down to Woodhouse's, Davy, and they did that thing with cricket it's the most ungentlemanly thing with cricket when Scott Gourley went out to pat the wicket and they threw his wickets down and appealed to the umpire. You know, he played the ball and then sort of nodded to say I'm going out because the wicket was wet, and they threw his wickets down and he was given run out because by the laws of the game it was run out. And then after the game they threw stones at one of our buses leaving, and that was Arthurton. Mike Arthurton's brother was playing for them, Chris Arthurton, and that was the sportsmanship that they showed us. But we beat them, Davy. So that was okay. Perhaps, and maybe I'm doing us a disservice, but to them Lords was an absolute mecca. To us Lords was a mecca. But the difference was Lords to them was their dream, and they were almost insistent that they were going to get there before us. We looked at Lords as that's where we'd like to get, but it's not our given right to get there.
And so on to 1985 and all that, where we discover how Fruchie dealt with the shock of being charged for their post-match tea, sandwiches and cakes, while being treated like William Wallace's invading army by hostile crowds, and looked down on by none too enamoured opponents as they set out in their dream of winning the National Village Cup. To put Fruchie Cricket Club's achievement into some kind of context, in the 1980s the Scottish Sports Awards had a Team of the Year winner. In 1983, it was Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen after beating Real Madrid in the Cup Winners' Cup final. In 1984, it was the Scotland Rugby Union team after winning the Five Nations with the Grand Slam. And in 1985, the Scottish Team of the Year was Fruchie. As they say in Fife, many a mickle makes a muckle. Now, I'm from Ayrshire, so that makes no sense. But when translated, it's a phrase that aptly describes the contribution made by the inhabitants of this village of just over 1,000 people. A small community working together to create something greater than all of its parts. A band of brothers never content to just make up the numbers. A team imbued with a winning mentality. Fergie himself would have been very proud of them, although given the players' liking for a night out, he may occasionally have been forced to bring out the hairdryer. And so, to Lords. Journalist and author Neil Drysdale has written a book about Fruchie's date with destiny called Dad's Army, and attending the match on that fateful September day in 85. Here, he talks about Fruchie's opponents in the quarter-finals, Oulton.
The match against Oulton was one of these contests where it was much easier than Fruchie had imagined it. You know, they'd had a really tough battle against a team called Cleater in the last 16, and they'd only just won that by a handful of runs. And I think because Oulton were from Yorkshire and the Yorkshire teams were traditionally very strong, you know, they travelled up probably thinking they were the favourites. But it was one of these afternoons where everything that could go right for Dave Christie's son Brian. You know, he just had one of these days where he bowled a beautiful spell. He swung the ball around. The conditions were conducive to what he was doing, and he took 6 wickets for 15. And basically, the English team never really knew what hit them, and they were skittled out for 73. And it was one of these games where, you know, I spoke to Brian later on, and he just said, you know, so you have very few days where everything goes right, but that was one of these days where it did for him. And 6 for 15 obviously made the man of the match choice very, very easy to decide.
Here's Fruchie captain Dave Christie with his thoughts on their opponents en route to the final. But first, Fruchie wicketkeeper and opening batsman Alan Duncan gives his memories of Oulton, and then Bilsden, their opponents in the semi-finals.
Yeah, they had 2 brothers, the Badley brothers. And I've often, still have perhaps, got a bad name behind the stumps and so on. So I like to play aggressive until we come off the boundary park. But I was really an apprentice compared to the Badley brothers. with some of the language that I heard when I know it was Brian, Dave's son, who's sadly passed, but he was on his form that day, and he was bowling boomerangs, and these guys were putting their bat forward, and I was watching the ball boomerang into the wickets. And you know, I've heard a few expletives in my life, but those were obviously Yorkshire expletives, which was new territory for me. But we destroyed them completely that day with superb bowling with Brian at 5 wickets, and they couldn't handle it. And they were a good side. But then Bilston, we knew nothing about Bilston. I think perhaps that was our one and only time ever in the semi-final. We've been lucky and often unlucky enough. We've been in the semi-final 3-4 times, and getting beaten in the semi-final must be the worst. I know that. But they came out. One of the things I distinctly remember about them, they had a boy James, who was their opening batter, who'd been in America all that week on business. And they flew him back and picked him up at Edinburgh, and he more or less arrived at the ground to come out to bat. I mean, there's no way that he had prepared properly, but perhaps that was showing that they didn't expect to lose. And when they bowled us out for 117, they were convinced they were going to win. But Davy took the last wicket when they were 112. And one of the abiding memories is Beth Watson, who was a great fruity person, very, very, very church orientated. This was Sunday the 18th of August, and her car was parked behind me as wicketkeeper, because I remember the wickets exploding, and that was it, we're at Lord's. And I turned round and Beth Watson was beckoning me to come up. And I went up to her car and she threw open the boot. And there was as much drink in the back of her boot that could float a navy up at Newborough in the harbour there. And she was, and I thought, Beth, you're so church orientated.
She never do drink. She never drank herself.
But she says, I think the boys could deal with this. And I looked at it and I thought, well, that'll keep us going while we're in the dressing room, but I'm not sure what'll happen after that.
Oh, it was terrific.
It was
tremendous. It
really
was.
The feeling was
that day, the crowd that was here watching that semi-final was the biggest crowd I've ever seen at Frookie, and for anything else. It's huge. They were piled up outside the clubhouse, and it was still raining. It was great. I remember my mother coming up to me and grabbing me. The tears were streaming down her face, you know. And
it was brilliant. And I remember us standing outside and you giving a little speech. And I kind of wonder if that was one of the few times in my life that I've taken water in my whiskey. But I think that was to do with the rain, Davy.
I can't put into words my feelings about other than it was great. Looking back, and I've looked back through the paper cuttings and everything I've got, and you just tried to say to yourself, we were meant to win. I can't put it any other way. We were just meant to win that game.
Frookie managed to get the job done. They won by 12 runs eventually, and that was actually a bigger advantage than they thought they might at some point. It looked at one point as if it might go completely down to the wire, but they got the job done, and I think, you know, Dave Christie and Dave Cowan and other members of the team, they were just so wet and so knackered by the end of the game that, you know, they were obviously delighted and excited that they'd reached the final, but it was one of these days where, you know, everybody was so drooked that it only hit them later that what we've achieved. The 639 team started, and now here we are, we're in the final against this English team, Rowledge, and we have a chance. We'll be going to Lord's and we'll be taking the whole village down with us. But so it was a remarkable afternoon.
From 639 teams, the National Village Cup of 1985 was down to 2. Surrey side Rowledge against Fife's very own Frookie. Were Frookie there just to make up the numbers at Lord's? Captain Dave Christie was in no doubt.
We want to win at Lord's. Yes. It wasn't a case of just going there to play a game of cricket. We were representing our village, our county, Scotland. Everything was different from that day on. And from that day that we won the semi-final, our lives for the next 14 days weren't our own. We were at the club every night. There was that many reporters there, film crews. Oh, it was a nightmare in a sense.
It was
because
difficult.
we'd never been in that position before.
There was times where we fell out with each other because the pressure, and because things were happening in 3 or 4 places at once. And somebody might have said, "Oh, you knew about that, but I didn't know about that." And he was doing that, but he didn't tell him. And it was quite a pressure for that time.
I was glad when I got to the next weekend and we had a game of cricket to play on the Saturday, and I think we had a game on the Sunday as well. I can't remember rightly, but we played cricket that weekend, and because we played cricket that weekend, it got all the boys back thinking cricket instead of thinking, where have I got to be for filming here and we're going there. And we actually thought about going along to Falkland to practice and not tell anybody. Go and practice there, because we turned up for practice the Tuesday and Thursday and we couldn't get to practice. There was too many reporters. Oh, jeez.
But the good side of it, and this maybe sound bad, but it's the truth. It's absolute truth. One of the good sides was how the community, how our local village were proud and prepared to support us. And between the 18th of August and the final itself, well, a couple of days before the final, because we went down on the Friday, £1,500 was handed in. Now back 38 years ago, that was a lot of money, was handed in for the boys to have a drink in London by the local villagers, handing £1 or £5 or even £10. £1,500 was put together. Then you realised that we were definitely representing the village and our community. We couldn't let them down.
Sunday, the 1st of September 1985, Fruchy's date with cricketing destiny. One of the most iconic images from that day was Dave Christie leading the magnificent 11 through the famous W.G. Grace Gates into cricket's most hallowed ground, bedecked in tartan, uplifted by the skirl of the pipes, ready to gate laldy, to use a technical term. Dave recalls the march to Lord's.
Oh, that was just tremendous. For the boys all, they agreed to put on kilts for a start, because some of the boys had said, "Oh, I'm not putting a kilt on," blah, blah, blah. But they did. They never said a word. They went, they got fitted for kilts. We all went there in kilts. Obviously we changed once we got on the bus into the grey trousers and blazers that were all supplied to us. Oh, that was tremendous. And I think a lot of the people in London were chuffed to see a piper leading us along the road from the hotel, because it was only about 300 yards or so.
Westmoreland,
and the piper had played at Cowell Highland Games on the Saturday, and his daughter and her husband flew down with him to Lord's on the Sunday morning for us to come to the hotel and piped us in. Alistair Curley.
Fruchy tourists come fully equipped. Their own piper and march, their own choir, and the swagger that goes with knowing their own worth.
Well, the whole day just felt surreal, because London at the time in a shop, and I kind of read in one of the Sunday papers that there's this Scottish team had made it to the National Village Cup final, and it was actually the Observer, I think it was, that somebody wrote a really, when you look back on it, it was quite a scathing, kind of stereotypical piece about bagpipes and whiskey and, Jock Tamson's bairns and the rest of it about, but are they going to be any good at cricket? But I just thought, I'm going to go along and have a look at this. I didn't live far from Lord's, and I thought, what's this going to be like? And I suppose I'd imagined there might be 50 people there or 100 people there, but once you got into the ground, you realise, good grief, the place is full of kilts, and it's full of posters, and it's full of saltires, and it's full of people singing and "Come on, Fruchy," and you've got T-shirts with Fruchy's name in it, and you realise that there were thousands of people there.
To give a sense of what the Fruchie players were likely to experience that day, here's former professional cricketer and BBC cricket correspondent Jonathan Agnew talking about playing at Lord's for the very first time.
Well, I can only imagine how they all felt. No one ever forgets the first moment they appear at Lord's as a spectator, let alone as a player. You've seen so many photographs and heard so many stories about the home of cricket, and no doubt walking into the ground for the first time is something that you never forget. The slope, for a start, again, is something that you've often heard about and read about and seen pictures, but until you actually see it, going down from left to right as you gaze out from the pavilion is something that takes a bit of getting used to. And it's quite small as well, the ground. It's quite an intimate feeling. But then going into the pavilion for that very first time, up the creaking staircases and into the dressing rooms, out onto the balcony, and looking out over the hallowed turf is an absolutely extraordinary experience. Great excitement, a certain amount of trepidation and fear, I'm sure, at the same time, but what an honour and a privilege to play at Lord's for the first time.
Now to the action, courtesy of the late, great John Milne.
And now to the serious stuff, and at Lord's it's very serious. Rowledge won the toss and kept Fruchie in suspense until their skipper decided if the damp atmosphere was to the advantage of his bowlers. He chose to bat, and Fruchie breathed a sigh of relief. This was the Mean Machine's chance to show their paces over a tight 40 overs and set their batsmen a target.
They had played at the Oval previously in other years, a competition for Surrey, I think. And the final was at the Oval, so they'd been in that final. I don't know, I can't remember if they won the competition, but they definitely played there. So the big time, yes, they were accustomed to that. We didn't know much about them other than the fact that their top batsman, Yates, had scored hundreds in the previous rounds. So we knew that they were a good side. I was chuffed when I got them out. I bowled them. Well, it was an inside edge, to be fair. But the slope on the pitch helped as well, because that was usually what I bowled anyway. And he just got an inside edge onto his stumps. Aye.
And he was out for 10. And we said, see you later, meaning it.
2 for 56. Still, they had the star man to come. Chris Yates looked the part all right, for 10 runs at least. And then Dad, as Dave Christie is affectionately known, decided that was quite enough.
Key points of the game, to me, was our bowling and fielding. Our fielding, we never dropped the catch. We never let a ball go past. We didn't miss field or anything like that. They did. Their fielding wasn't very good. I was surprised how poor their fielding was, really, because if they'd stopped, one went for a 4. I can remember Dave Cowan hitting it through the covers and it went out through the boys' legs. Now, if you add these wee bits and pieces up, we had a lot more runs to score later on and we probably wouldn't have got there. Their fielding was poor on such a beautiful carpet as Lord's. I mean, it's like Garland's carpet there. Beautiful. You know, and if you can't field there, you'll not be able to field anywhere. And our catching, I mean, the catches we took.
We had run-outs as well. You know, Trewartha took 4 wickets and a run-out as well. The run-outs changed the game.
It changed the game, but that was all down to our good fielding again. Catching 2 run-outs, fielding, diving and stopping everything. Yeah, I was chuffed with that.
It's goodbye from him, and the end of the big scores. Next wicket down, 108 for 6. Now it's Terry Trewartha's chance to shine. The Rowledge tail enders are reluctant to leave at Lord's, and they put together a creditable 26 among them. But Trewartha's haul is more than creditable. 24 for 4 as he skittles the tail. Fruki certainly aren't just here for the beer. They openly admit their batting can be erratic, but now they have a target, they're having a go. Mark Wilkie has 10 to his credit before one gets behind him. That's 23 for 1. Still a better start than Rowledge. But for Alan Crichton, it's not to be. 25 for 2. But he'll cheer up before long.
Oh, there was a few old wobbly moments throughout the innings, but the boys stuck in. And I've got to mention George Crichton. Mm-hmm. George stuck in, and I think he was 15 not out or something like that, 12 not out.
I've got the score.
Can't remember, yeah. But he held things together at the end. I batted with him. I think we put on about 25 or 30.
So it's time for a captain's innings, with Dave Christie joining the man who was to be top scorer as well as the top fielder. George Crichton might make a top sprinter too, judging by his performance between the wickets. The old head and young legs take as much of the risk out of run chasing as possible, and it really doesn't matter when the skipper can't make his ground, because it's now 1-3-3 for 8. George Crichton makes the single that ties the score, and Fruki have wickets and overs in hand.
It was touch and go, or nail biting time, and
but we had
Brian, my son, my son, he went in. I passed him on the way because I ran the cell out stupidly. It was my own fault, nobody else's. And I passed him. I says, "Now all you have to do is hang in with George, just hang in there." He says, "Feather, I can hardly hold the bat." He was shaking.
And it was worse with Nevin McNaughton. I was in the dressing room, scared to look out. I never saw the last 10, 20 runs. I was in the back, shouting forward to the boys on the balcony, "What's happening, what's happening, what's happening?" And Nevin McNaughton, who sadly passed, was beside me, and he was moving from the toilet to his seat in the toilet. I'm not sure he could have come down the stair. He was that worried about it.
He was in the toilet.
We had to hang in at 8 wickets because if Niven had gone out there, he would have fallen on his wickets, never mind got out. A great guy, man. Great guy, we miss him. Miss him.
It was just terrific, it really was.
The match ended in a tie, but Fruki won it because they'd lost fewer wickets. You know, and at the end you had the slightly crazy scene of, you know, there was Fruki thought that they'd scored the winning run, but the umpire called dead ball. But before he'd called dead ball, you know, scores of Fruki fans had invaded the pitch. You know, and it wasn't quite as bad as Wembley in 1977. But, you know, they really thought they'd won, and there were men and women. And Dave Christie remembers one of his family and saying, "Oh, for heaven's sake, what is she doing on the pitch?" You know, so this is this hallowed turf at Lord's. And so obviously they had to restore order, and they had to kind of get a bit of calm back.
The only time it's happened in the final, it was a tie. But as you say, because we lost less wickets. And that was the other thing I said to Brian when I passed him. I says, "No, you don't need to score runs. George will get a single because he was facing. Just play out the over." But the umpire made a mistake in the last over. It was a 7-ball over. So we could have lost it on a 7-ball over.
Yeah, but to be fair to umpire, David, there was a pitch invasion in the middle of that over.
I think he was more worried about that.
Yes, in case the carpet got a scuff in it, with a couple of hundred people.
I'd got a photograph at home of my 2 sister-in-laws running across the pitch with their high heels on.
Oh dear. Scottish football fans have been given a lot of pelters for what they did at Wembley, but we've fortunately not had as many pelters for what we did at Lord's on the ground.
Oh, it was terrific. To see boys standing there, tears running down their faces, you know, that said it all.
Fruki Cricket Club had done it by the narrowest of margins. National Village Cup champions 1985. Under the circumstances, the Rowledge captain, Alan Pryor, was especially gracious in defeat.
Worst we can do is lose, and it's not the end of the world. Always another year, mate. See you next year, hopefully. A lot of grass, but still. Didn't field very well, did we? Lost 10 runs in the field, made a difference. So, always another day. Jolly good luck to them. They played very sensibly. Even when we got a breakthrough, they were there, weren't they? You know, and just sort of looking for the ones and the twos and whatever. I thought they played it very sensibly. Good game, really, wasn't it?
And so saying, Rowledge faded discreetly into the background, leaving the stage to the first Scottish team ever to take anything away from the home of English cricket.
I've got a photograph, well, a painting actually, boy in the village did a painting of me with a cup. It's 3 feet across and 4 feet down. And my wife says, "You're not putting that in the living room, so it's hanging in my bedroom." So, of course, I said to my family, I says, "Now, when I kick the bucket, one of you ones will be to take it." Well, Brian's not here now, so he's not involved. So it's my daughter Linda. She says, "That's no hanging in my house." I says, "I'll get to the club, they could use it as a dartboard." It was a village-wide smashing painting, mate. I think it will be in the toilet outside. They've got an outside toilet in their garage. I'll probably end up in it.
I'm sure it will take pride of place. So what next for the Fruchi story and the legacy of their achievement? Well, there's currently a feature film in development called All Out, with a script written by none other than Philip Differ. How wonderful it would be to see Fruchi's big hearts making it onto the big screen. So where does Fruchi's achievement rank in Scottish sporting history? Neil Drysdale is in no doubt.
I think it's up there with almost any of them. You know, I think about, David Sole leading the Scotland team out, with the famous slow march in the 1990 Grand Slam decider. I think about Liz McColgan taking on the rest of the world in the 10,000 metres in Tokyo in 1991. But I don't know, you had 639 teams start out. Most of these teams hadn't even heard of Fruchi. They couldn't have pinpointed Fruchi on a map, and Fruchi ended up winning the trophy. And they're the first and only Scottish side to ever win this trophy, and I think there will never be another Scottish victory in this conversation because it's changed. So I think it's absolutely up there with the greatest stories in Scottish sporting history.
Fruchi Fever, when the Scots beat the English at the home of cricket, was presented by me, Andrew Cotter. The script editor was Philip Differ and the producer was Gus Beattie. Fruchi Fever is a Gusman production for BBC Radio Scotland.